Some folks find peace in noise, in traffic, in concrete towers scraping the sky. Me? I find it in the rustle of wind through prairie grass, the low bellow of my cattle at dawn, and the hiss of coffee boiling over a campfire stove. I was born on this land, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. We've always lived by a simple code. Take care of the land, and it'll take care of you. No need for fancy rules or petty committees to tell you how to paint your fence or where to park your truck. I own 300 acres just outside of what used to be a sleepy town. These days, you can see the suburbia creeping in like mold across an old loaf of bread. Across the ridge, where there used to be wild sage and rattlesnakes, there's now a grid of cookie-cutter homes with manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. And of course, an HOA to keep everything looking like a glossy brochure for Stepford. We've never seen eye to eye, the HOA and I. It started small. Complaints about my roosters crowing too early, or the visual obstruction of my weathered barn. Once they even sent a letter suggesting I replace my old wooden fence with something aesthetically consistent with their neighborhood. I pinned it to the outhouse door. Good reading material, if nothing else. But mostly I let them be. And they let me be. I figured as long as they stayed on their side of the ridge, they could play mayor all they wanted. I didn't need their fast internet or their monthly meetings about hedges and driveway lengths. I had everything I needed right here. Peace, space, and the kind of freedom city folk pay big money to simulate on weekends. I should have known it wouldn't last. Folks like them, they never stop at their own fences. They always want more. More control, more reach, more land, even if it isn't theirs to take. I didn't know it then, but they were about to cross a line. Not just a moral one, but a real, physical, barbed wire, this land is mine line. And when they did, well, I reckon they didn't expect a rancher to know how to play the long game. It started like any other morning. Sun just peeking over the ridge, casting gold over the fields, and the dew still clinging to the grass like it didn't want to let go of the night. I was finishing my second cup of black coffee when Luis, one of my ranch hands, pulled up in the old Ford looking half pissed and half confused. "You see the trenchers out by the east fence?" he asked, stepping out, dust still on his boots. I squinted, toward the horizon. Sure enough, there was a cluster of construction equipment. Big trucks, spools of cable, a couple of orange-vested guys with hard hats walking around like they owned the place. I didn't remember hiring any work out that way. We jumped in my truck and headed over. By the time we got close, I could see they'd already laid down a good 100 yards of fiber line, bright orange conduits snaking along the edge of the pasture, crossing right over a strip of land that belonged to me. One of the workers waved, like he expected a friendly hello. "You boys lost?" I asked, not bothering to kill the engine. The foreman came over, clipboard in hand, acting like I was the one interrupting their day. "No, sir, we're right where we need to be. Got a permit here to lay cable for the HOA's new high-speed internet." I stared at him, dead silent. "This is my land." He nodded like he'd heard it before. "Right, but the easement gives us access along the edge. It's all approved. You can check with the HOA board. They coordinated everything." I didn't answer, just turned the truck around and headed straight back to the house. An hour later, I was in town at the county records office, breathing in that old air that smells like dust and bureaucracy. Took some digging, but I found it. Sure enough, there was an easement, an old one, damn near ancient, granted back in the 70s to a local telephone co-op that went belly up years ago. Technically, it hadn't been revoked, but it also hadn't been used in decades. And nowhere in the document did it mention fiber optics, data transmission, or anything close to what they were doing now. I called the HOA president, Carol McIntyre, the kind of woman who treats her HOA title like a sheriff's badge. She answered, with that clipped tone that always made her sound like she was in the middle of a board meeting, even if she was just stirring cream into her coffee. "I assume you're calling about the cable install," she said, before I even got a word out. You ran fiber through my property without asking. We didn't need to ask. The utility easement gives us the right. It's perfectly legal. Be glad your old dirt's finally doing something useful. My jaw tightened. That easements. For a phone line that hasn't existed since before I was out of high school. And yet it's still on the books, she replied. If you have a problem, take it up with the county. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, phone in my hand, heat building behind my eyes. My land, my damn land. They didn't just cross a line, they stomped on it, laid cable over it, and dared me to do something about it. I didn't go tearing up their cable. Not yet. I'm not that reckless, no. I decided right then I was going to do this the smart way, the patient way. Because if they thought they could walk all over me and my land, they had no idea who they were messing with. The thing about living off the land is you learn patience. Cattle don't fatten in a day. Fences don't build themselves. You wait, you watch, and you act when the time's right. So instead of raising hell like I wanted to, I went back to that county office and started pulling every file I could find on that dusty old easement. The lady at the front desk recognized me. I guess not many folks come in wearing boots caked in manure and smelling like cedar smoke. She gave me a few side eyes as I flipped through decades of property records and easement filings. I finally found it, tucked into a bundle of microfilm like some artifact from another century. The document was dated 1977. A limited right-of-way granted to Pine Ridge Telephone Cooperative for the purpose of establishing and maintaining analog telecommunications lines and service poles. That was it. No mention of data, no mention of fiber, and certainly nothing about third-party commercial use by a modern internet provider. I had them. I took a copy of the easement and drove straight to my friend Daniel's office. Daniel and I went to high school together. He took the law school route, I took the ranch route. We both got calluses, just in different ways. He leaned back in his leather chair, reading through the paperwork while I paced. "This is ancient," he muttered. "Doesn't even mention data transmission, let alone fiber optics. These easements have to be used within the scope they were granted. So what does that mean legally? It means unless they're stringing up analog phone lines with ceramic insulators and copper wire, they're operating outside the bounds of the easement. It's a limited right, not a blank check. They're trespassing." I nodded slowly. "And the HOA? They authorized this," he grinned. "That makes it even better. Because they did so without securing proper rights or renegotiating the easement, they're liable. If this goes to court, the provider, the HOA board, maybe even the contractor, they could all be held responsible for unlawful use of private property." That was the confirmation I needed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just being some stubborn old rancher mad about change. They broke the law. Now I could have gone scorched earth right then and there, called the sheriff, demanded an injunction, maybe even sued. But I was starting to realize something far more interesting. If they thought they could take something from me without asking, maybe it was time I took something back. And not just out of spite, out of strategy. Let them dig their hole a little deeper. Let them spend more money laying down more line, tying themselves into a knot I could pull tight whenever I wanted. Because when the hammer came down, I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to flip the whole game on its head. For a while, I kept my head down and let them hang themselves with their own arrogance. I figured the longer they trespassed, the deeper the hole they were digging. But then, they got bold, too bold. It started with a letter. One of those smug little envelopes with the HOA's logo embossed on the corner like it meant something. Inside was a formal request for me to tear down 2 of my old barns near the ridge. Claimed they were an eyesore that disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the HOA's scenic overlook. Those barns have been standing since my grandfather's time. Weathered, sure, but full of history. One still holds the branding irons we used before things got more modern. Another's got my father's initials carved into the doorway. They're not pretty, but they're mine. I called Carol McIntyre, again trying, foolishly, to reason with her. "They're not even on your land," I said. "Yes, but they're visible from ours," she said, like that was supposed to matter. "You have a responsibility to maintain visual harmony with adjacent neighborhoods." I laughed genuinely. Lady, you built your HOA on the edge of a working ranch. If you want harmony, try planting trees. We're prepared to pursue a blight citation with the county if you don't act. That got my blood hot. A week later, another envelope showed up, this time from a law office. Courtesy notice, it was labeled in bold. Apparently, I was to refrain from any activity that might disturb, damage, or obstruct the fiber optic line now running through my pasture. They cited a mix of vague safety regulations and local codes they clearly thought I'd be too backwoods to look up. That was the moment I stopped playing patient. I was done letting them bully me with their cut-and-paste legal threats and holier-than-thou HOA jargon. They weren't just pushing. They were trying to erase my boundaries, treat my land like it was some extension of their little suburban playhouse. They wanted war, but they didn't realize I'd already been preparing for it. I wasn't just documenting. I'd already had a surveyor confirm the exact position of the cable, already lined up my lawyer to draft a cease and desist when the time came. And most importantly, I had another idea, something that would hit them harder than a lawsuit. See, if they were so desperate for control, for infrastructure, for that precious fiber line, what would happen if I handed the keys to someone else? Someone they couldn't bully. Someone with deeper pockets, better tech, and a grudge to settle. They thought they were laying cable through some forgettable dirt pasture. They didn't know they were trespassing on a trap. I wasn't interested in just slapping their hand and telling them not to do it again. No, I wanted them to feel it, deep down in their pockets and pride. This wasn't just about a trench through my pasture. It was about being disrespected, about them acting like they owned me just because they wore neckties and held meetings in community centers with folding chairs and free cookies. So I called up two people. First was Daniel again, my old buddy, the lawyer. But this time, I told him to bring in someone who knew real estate inside and out, someone who could dig into that easement and find every loose thread we could pull. He delivered. A week later, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a real estate attorney named Allison Grant, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense tone and a briefcase full of legal ammunition. "This easement is a dead man walking," she said, flipping through the documentation. "They're operating outside the scope. The original grantee no longer exists, and no one reassigned or renegotiated the rights. Give me 2 weeks, and I can file for revocation." "And how long before we can make it stick?" I asked. "Long enough to make them sweat," she smiled. "But you're not just after a legal win, are you?" "No," I said. "I want to hit 'em where it hurts." That's when I brought in my second call, Jason Wu, a telecom consultant with a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. He used to work for one of the major providers, but now he freelanced, mostly helping smaller fiber optic startups get into areas dominated by the big dogs. And when I mentioned the HOA's current provider, he perked up like a bloodhound catching a scent. "They're arrogant and slow," he said. "Overcharge, underdeliver. I've been trying to get one of my clients into this zip code for months, but the HOA's exclusivity deal keeps us locked out." "Not anymore," I told him. We walked the ranch together, mapping out a new route for fiber. This time it had run entirely along my property, skirting the ridge where the HOA homes backed up like teeth in a row. I'd give the new company a full right-of-way lease, legal, recorded, and unbreakable. And with newer tech and better speeds, they'd undercut the HOA's current provider in both price and performance. "They'll jump ship the second they see faster service," Jason said. "You sure you want to go through with this?" I smiled. "Let's bury some wire." They wanted to use my land without asking. Now I was going to use my land against them, with paperwork, not pitchforks, because nothing makes entitled people panic like losing their monopoly and their control. It felt good. Hell, it felt damn good, signing that lease agreement. 30 pages of legalese, notarized and double-checked, granting exclusive right-of-way to Skylink Fiber, a fast-rising telecom company eager to tear into the local market. They got full access to a private fiber trench running along the west side of my land, neatly parallel, but completely independent from the illegal cable the HOA's provider had snuck in. Only this time, everything was above board. fully legal, signed, sealed, and county recorded. I even walked the route with their lead engineer and handed him a thermos of hot coffee like we were planting a flag on new territory. Because that's what this was. A reclaiming Skylink didn't waste time. By the end of the week, they had trenchers on site, big reels of gleaming cable unspooling like silver snakes across my pasture. This wasn't some quiet little install. They made it known. Their trucks had bright banners, their crews were polite but visible, and their contractors handed out business cards like candy. While the dirt was still being turned, I sent the first volley, a formal cease and desist to the HOA board and their telecom provider, drafted by Allison, stamped by the county, and delivered with a little grin by Luis. It cited the original 1977 easement in full. The letter explained, very clearly, that the scope of the easement had been violated, that the easement's original assignee no longer existed, and that the installation of fiber optic infrastructure, without the landowner's permission, constituted trespass. They had 30 days to remove their lines or face a full lawsuit. That included damages, back rent, and fees for unauthorized use of private land. Carol McIntyre called me that night, voice tight with panic hidden behind forced civility. "This is a mistake," she said. "You're sabotaging infrastructure that benefits everyone." "No, Carol," I said, sipping my coffee as I watched Skylink's dig team from my porch. "You trespassed on private land. Now I'm offering better infrastructure with permission. This will cause confusion, disruption. That's your problem. You should have knocked before you broke down the door." And that was just the start. Skylink went on the offensive. With my permission, they launched a hyper-targeted marketing campaign aimed specifically at the HOA community. Postcards, door flyers, digital ads, faster internet, no HOA markup, no throttling, better service. They held pop-up booths near the community center, offered free installations, and even threw in 2 months of complimentary service for early switchers. It worked like a cattle prod on a beehive. Within a week, 10 houses had canceled with the HOA's provider. By 2 weeks, it was 35. Whole blocks started flipping. Residents who once sneered at my ranch aesthetic were suddenly asking if I could recommend good local fencing companies, because apparently HOA regulations didn't apply. If you moved just outside the neighborhood lines, the board tried to fight it, sent warning letters, held emergency meetings. But the truth was, they were losing control fast. Their monopoly on infrastructure, the thing that gave them leverage over their homeowners, was slipping away fiber strand by fiber strand, and all they could do was watch it unravel from across the ridge, one angry Zoom meeting at a time. Me? I just kept sipping my coffee. The sound of cable being laid had never been so sweet. It all came to a head faster than I expected. About 3 weeks after Skylink's first cables were laid and their marketing took off like a brush fire in July, I got a message from Allison. They're pulling out. The original provider, the one that piggybacked onto my land with the HOA's smug blessing, had officially notified the board that, due to legal complications and elevated liability risk, they were terminating all service contracts within the HOA's jurisdiction. In plain English, they were cutting and running, and the best part? They made it clear that the HOA was to blame. Turns out my cease and desist had spooked their legal team. Once they dug into the easement paperwork, they realized they'd built thousands of feet of line on illegal ground. Not only could they be sued by me, but by their own customers for loss of service. It wasn't worth the risk. The fallout was immediate. Residents who had paid for premium HOA internet installation were now staring at black screens and blinking routers. Some had been forced to upgrade their home wiring, all based on promises of exclusive community service. Now those promises were unraveling like wet hay bale twine. Word spread fast, especially when Skylink's trucks kept showing up, smiling and clean-cut, replacing the old company's work with theirs. Skylink didn't just step in. They flexed. Free upgrades, waived fees, even referral bonuses. They made the HOA look like amateurs, and that's when the HOA tried to salvage the wreck. They scheduled an emergency open meeting at the community center, one of those gatherings where they hand out tiny plastic cups of warm lemonade and pretend they're in control. They thought they could spin the story, that they could redirect the blame to the provider, or even onto the residents themselves for not being patient. They didn't count on me showing up. I wore my best boots, clean jeans, and a pressed shirt that still smelled faintly of cedar wood. Walked right up to the mic when they opened the floor and unfolded a stack of papers that looked official as hell. Because they were. "I'm the owner of the land your former provider trespassed on," I began, calm and steady. "They laid fiber optic lines through a defunct 1977 easement that never gave them the right. The original permit was for analog telephone poles, nothing more. That easement expired the moment the original company dissolved. They never had permission. The HOA never had permission. And that's why you're all sitting in the dark." There were gasps. A few cell phones went up to record. I flipped the next page. Here's a copy of the cease and desist that forced them to withdraw. Here's a notarized lease agreement I signed with Skylink, who, by the way, used a fully legal easement, obtained with full consent and cooperation. They knocked. They asked. They paid. Then I pulled out the pièce de résistance, a mounted photo board with side-by-side shots. The sloppy, rushed trench job from the old provider versus Skylink's sleek, tidy install with conduit cleanly labeled and no patchy backfill. You could hear the murmurs ripple across the room like a prairie wind. Carol McIntyre turned redder than a branding iron left in the fire too long. She tried to speak, but one of the residents stood up, an older gentleman with a HOA newsletter, still in his lap, and asked the question everyone was thinking. "Did you ever have permission to use his land?" Carol stammered. Tried to blame the contractors, the provider, even me. But it was over. They called for a vote right there. The room raised hands, first for a motion to censure the board, then another to remove the president. Carol didn't even stay for the vote count. She just gathered her purse, eyes burning, and walked out. As for me, I lingered a bit, let the weight of it all settle. Then, just before I left, I turned to the remaining board members in the crowd and said, "Next time you want to use my land, try knocking." I tipped my hat and walked out to the sound of people clapping. Not bad for a dumb rancher. A week after the dust settled, a letter arrived. This one a far cry from the smug legal. Threats of before. No gold-embossed logos or veiled demands. Just a plain envelope with a polite handwritten note from the newly appointed HOA president, a retired engineer named Greg Sanders. He apologized. Sincerely. Said the previous board had acted with unacceptable arrogance and without proper oversight. They'd voted to offer a settlement for the unauthorized use of my land, along with a formal acknowledgement that any future activity involving my property would require my direct, written consent. No more assumptions, no more games. I accepted, not because I needed the money, but because setting the precedent mattered. The ranch returned to its natural rhythm after that. The trench lines healed, the grass regrew, and the cows never once complained about the fiber lines humming beneath their hooves. If anything, they seemed to enjoy the new fencing Skylink helped me install as part of the deal. Cleaner, straighter, and far less likely to get them tangled. Every month, a quiet little deposit hits my account from the right-of-way lease. Not much, but steady, honest, and earned on my terms. Sometimes I ride out along the ridge just to look across at the HOA homes, neat and quiet behind their identical fences. I don't hold a grudge, but I do remember. They thought a rancher wouldn't notice, wouldn't fight back, wouldn't win. But out here, we keep score a little differently. And now, every time a signal pings through their shiny new routers, it runs straight through the land they once tried to steal. Funny thing is, the cows still don't mind the signal. City folks, especially the HOA type, always make the same mistake. They think because we live simple, we are simple. That if we don't wear suits or hold conference calls, we must not understand leverage or contracts or what a square foot of dirt is really worth. But out here, we learn young. Land is life. You protect it. You know it down to the rock and root. And when someone tries to take it, quietly, arrogantly, assuming you're too slow to notice, you don't just push back. You make it hurt. What that HOA didn't understand was that I wasn't fighting to stop change. I don't mind fiber cables. I don't even mind city folks building their matchbox houses and naming them after the trees they cut down. What I mind is trespass disguised as progress. Theft dressed up in paperwork and fake smiles. I've got no problem with technology or growth. Hell, now I've got better internet than half the county. But if you come onto my land without asking, if you think I'll roll over just because your tie cost more than my boots, you've got another thing coming. I don't mind progress, but I'll be damned if you trespass on my land and call it a favor.